Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday Build. This is episode 1.5, and today we're going to talk about the topic filling up your reservoir, why Bird by Bird author Anne Lamott says there's no such thing as builder's block, featuring Aphrodite, Annie Lamott, and myself, Brittany Hernandez. Some of you will already know me, some don't know me yet. My name is Brittany Hernandez. My friend Emily calls me the bee emoji, and my dad and my uncle call me a combination of peanut and brittle. I served on active duty in the United States Coast Guard for 4 years, and afterwards became a lawyer using the GI Bill and practiced intellectual property and entertainment law in California. I have a master's degree in international film business from the University of Exeter and the London Film School. I served as the business development executive for a legal tech company called Vala, which is based out of Scotland. And I'm also, or served as, worked as a professional builder, specifically focused on the Gavel, formerly Documate platform, but also generally no code, low code development. I am the global ambassador to law schools for Gavel, as well as the program director and senior instructor for the Law Students in Legal Tech Access to Justice Fellowship Program, which is an initiative by Gavel as well. I'm also the creator and host of the Lightning Talks for Legal Innovators series, which happens every month on the last Thursday. I'm also the creator and host of this show called Wednesday Build, and the creator of the first free interactive digital magazine that was built on Gavel called Code Word Hex. And I'm also the founder, course creator, and senior instructor of Chromium Academy, which has certification courses on Gavel, as well as instruction on software and Airtable and other topics relating to no code and low code development. So as you can see, we are going to be talking today about reservoirs and personal reservoirs, which relates to water. So our agenda for today is going to be, we're going to define a few things. We're going to talk about sources of water and then my favorite drinks. So let's go ahead and start with a few definitions, starting with what is a reservoir. So if we go to the definition of a reservoir is a large natural or artificial lake used as a source of water supply. So if you look at some pictures, they look like this. So we have this backed up source of water that then gets fed through to provide water to different sources. And just have this picture in your head as what a reservoir in your brain would be here in the back, and that will help to visualize what we're talking about here today. The other definition that we want to talk about is writer's block, or this idea of like a builder's block. So let's see what the official definition is. So writer's block is the condition of being unable to think of what to write or how to proceed with writing. So in this particular case, I am going to relate this idea or notion of writer's block to builder's block, which is the idea that you are trying to build an application or some kind of solution, digital solution, or other product or service solution for your particular audience, but you can't think of what to do. You can't think of where to start and how you can fill up your reservoir with lots of different things that you can pull from in order to make it to where whenever you encounter this situation, you are able to push past this writer's block or builder's block. So we're talking about reservoirs, we're talking about writer's block or builder's block, and this is how they all tie together. So in my personal book club that I do with my friends, which is called YEM, which was one that I joined back in, that was like 2020. So my friend Sasha runs this book club, and I've been reading the books every month. I think I only missed about 2 in the whole time. And the reason why I really like it is, one, Sasha is a great leader of this book club, but the other one is it has me reading books that I would have never really picked up on my own. And the way that I'm able to do that with all of the things that I have going on is that I listen to the books on Audible while I'm doing my hair and makeup and, putting my breakfast together and stuff, so that I am able to kind of consume a lot of these different books at the same time as getting something done that progresses my day, which is actually part of a completely separate topic around temptation bundling and habit stacking. And that has to do with sort of atomic habits. But in this particular case, for this month or this past month, we've been reading a book called Aphrodite by an author called Isabel Allende, who wrote a book called Paula. Well, she's also a journalist and wrote other things as well. But so we're reading this one. So it's a memoir of the senses, and it has to do with aphrodisiacs. So she talks about sort of sensuality and sort of how you can use different foods to become aroused and like spice up your relationships and stuff. And it's sort of like a memoir of the senses generally, and not just about this in like a sensual, sexy sort of way, but more just how you think about your world in a more sensually engaged way, and how the history of aphrodisiacs as well, which is really, really fascinating. But actually, what's interesting about this book is that I was reading this or listening to this on Audible, and just right from the forward, it inspired, like, one line of this book inspired this entire talk today. And the reason for that is, in the foreword of this book, she mentions that she says that she had experienced for the first time in her life writer's block after she finished her book Paula, which is a memoir that she wrote kind of about grief and loss after she lost her daughter early. And so she was trying so hard to like write different things, and every time she would sit down to write, she just would write and it wouldn't be very good and it wouldn't be very interesting or engaging. So she would always have to scrap everything. And every day she would just go to her coffee shop and just try to get inspired and try to think of things, but she couldn't think of anything. And actually, Anne Lamott, who is the author of many books, but a book I really love called Bird by Bird, she it's this one, Some Instructions on Writing and Life. And I highly recommend this particular version of the audiobook because it's narrated by Susan Bennett. And her narration of this book is so good. And it just like has the character of Anne Lamott that's like just makes you just love her. And she's just so funny. And it really expresses like her personality and style, which I think was really cool. Anyway, highly recommend this book. But anyway, so she's the author of this book and many other books. So Anne Lamott walked into the coffee shop that this author, Isabel Allende, was at. And Isabel talks to Annie and she says that she kind of explains what's happening. She's like, I'm having some writer's block. I can't figure out what to write about after my last book, Paula. And Anne Lamott says to her, there's no such thing as writer's block. It's just that the reservoir is empty. And that Isabel, she said, I needed to fill it up, or that Isabel needs to fill up her reservoir. And that was really inspiring to her. And Isabel actually thought about this a lot and remembered that she's a journalist and she can tap into that curiosity that she has as a journalist and her investigation skills. And she can tap into just research and discovering and allow the story to present itself to her along the way, which is how she was able to write this entire book or memoir about the senses called Aphrodite, which I'm now reading, and was inspired by all the way from the foreword, just from this one quote from a conversation she had with Anne Lamott. So going to the next section here, which is around sources of water to fill up your reservoir. So when we think about sources of water, we can think of them in broad categories. And then I'm going to tell you some of my specific favorites, which I'm going to call my favorite drinks. So in particular, we can think about sources of water as like what different categories could we possibly draw from that might help us to think about how we can build things for either solutions for ourselves, like let's say if we're trying to automate something in our lives, or we're trying to build a tool that improves our quality of life in some way, or for other people if we're trying to build for consumers, whether that's for direct to consumer or business to business or any other type of enterprise or whatever other model that you have, especially at scale. So when we're thinking about and building for other people, it's easier to use something called the user method. Um, so this is actually a source you could draw from, the first one I'll talk about, which is this idea of, actually I have this in Audible as well. So let me just find that really quick in my library so you can see what that looks like. I highly recommend Audible, by the way, because that's the only way I'm able to do any of this reading. So it's called the user method. Okay, so one source you could say is, one category of sources you could say is different, like, what would be a good like way of saying this? A good database of things like Google and Audible and YouTube. So you have that higher level, which is like all of these, sources of lots of different things. So things like Kindle, um, uh, so anything that would have like multiple sub layers underneath them. So for example, Audible being audiobooks of lots of different kinds, and Google being information of like anything you can think of, and YouTube as a source of video inspiration, and so on and so on. So you can think about those sort of higher, broader categories, and then we can kind of go down from there. So in this particular sense, Audible as a broader sense of a source of water, where a subcategory of that is this ebook, particular ebooks, and then my favorite drinks being particular books such as Aphrodite, Bird by Bird, and the user method. So just kind of thinking about and conceptualizing sources of water and favorite drinks in that particular kind of framework. And then also within this user method, your particular specific things that you would actually pull from your life. So it's like a multi-layered sort of process here. So with the user method, I actually know Jeff. Jeff and I met a couple years ago through church and became friends, and he's brilliant and he focuses on entrepreneurship and teaches in different universities and everything. And he's really great. So his book talks about how entrepreneurs create successful innovations, and he talks specifically about how you should just draw from your own life first when you're thinking about how to create something, because you are then your own user, like you are your own end user. So when you think about the product and how you would want it to be, instead of having this fictional person that you're trying to imagine, you're drawing from your own life and experience as your source that's within your reservoir of experience. Like, so all of your personal experiences that you go through every single day and everything you encounter can be part of your reservoir as a source of inspiration for a new build. So I really love this, but if you see this framework that we're talking about, we have this higher level of sort of database of things, which would be here Audible, which has the category of ebooks, audiobooks. And then within that, you have the category of things like books like the user method. And then within that is what he's actually saying, which is saying use and draw from things in your own life as in sources of inspiration within your reservoir to create different applications. So with that being said, I created a cool, well, I think it's cool. I recently did this as part of the code word hex series that I do every Tuesday, which is part of my digital magazine. And I did this build where we do case briefs and class notes. So the build case briefs and class notes is something that I drew from my personal life because it was how I did things in law school when I was briefing cases, but kind of taken to its next level of awesomeness. So basically, I made it to where I took what I used to do for my case briefs, which was I used to have let me just try to find it really quick. I used to have, when I was a 3L example, here's an example of when I was a 3L in law school. I used to have this as the way that I would do my case briefs and class notes. So I would have the class, and then I would have the date of class, then I would have the case name, where it was in the book, chapter and page number, one sentence summary of the case, the court, where it was in the case book, what the outcome of it was, what was the holding, and what was the case citation. And then I would also have the issues, the holdings, the rule, and then I would write in my class notes. And then whatever my problems were that I had to work on for that week, I would put my answers here. And then the same thing for the next case and the next case and the next case and so on. So that's how I would do it in law school, which worked fine. I would just copy and paste the table each week. But I wanted to see how I could make this a little bit more efficient. I created this more recently while now I'm a lawyer and I focus on legal technology now, but I was just sort of interested in if I was a law student again, how would I prefer to do this now? And now that I know and have these tools available to me that I can create with. And I created a way where I could put in all my class names so that I can say this case brief is for this class, for class on this date. Where is this situated? So I could say the law of agency, et cetera, et cetera. And then I could have it to be this page number and so on and so on. So I took all those things and put it in a format that would be easier to interact with. And then I made it to where I could brief up to 5 cases at a time. And then at the end, what would be output is two things. So the first one is that at the end of it, I would have the PDFs of each of these different cases. And then the other thing that happens is that I get give me one second, is that it gets taken to this case briefs and class notes database in Notion automatically through Zapier. So I created a Zap that makes it to where whenever I fill out that particular workflow, then it automatically feeds into this database and creates these different pages where all of the information that I want and put in there is there. And then I can just add my class notes right underneath it on that page. So that when I'm actually briefing the case during that particular stage of this experience, I interact with the information in this way. And I'm also provided with, at the end, an output document of the case brief. So I get provided with a document version of that particular case. So, and then it automatically feeds into here where on the actual day of the class, on the day of the class, I can just go in and find it and read it and refer to it here. So that specifically came from my own particular life experience as a person who went to law school, and how I would have preferred to have done this in the past if I could do it over again. Also, I have created things that inspired me through other parts of my life, which is my institution of this practice of gratitude, abundance, intention, visualization, affirmation, and smile, which relates to sort of meditations in the morning. So if I wanted to do have that be my daily journal here, I could put the entry date what it stands for. I can refer to that to remember. And every day I can just fill this out, and it logs this in my data manager here or my client portal, so that I have a record of what I said every day. So I say, I feel grateful for, I have plenty of, my word for the day is, I can see, I am. So I wanted to create like sort of a one repeating item app or a workflow or whatever, where I just write this in once a day, and it saves that as my daily journal to have a journaling habit. So anyway, so that's around this idea of taking something that's a database source, such as Audible, within that, finding a book like the user method or an audiobook like the user method. Then within that user method, it's telling me to draw from my personal experiences to create different types of things in your life. And then I applied that particular framework and suggestion and added that to my reservoir and pulled from the reservoir of my personal experience in order to build something like daily journals, class notes, and case briefs. So that's sort of that particular way of doing this. So generally, I highly recommend that books are one of my favorite drinks or versions of this, which I would recommend also reading widely. So when you're thinking about what you're trying to build, it's actually not, it is relevant to specifically read things or listen to audiobooks that relate specifically to what you're trying to build. But I actually think that you can come up with more creative connections, and I've had more inspiration from things that have nothing to do with what I'm trying to build. For example, if you think about this book here, Aphrodite, one line from the foreword of this book, which actually didn't even have anything to do with what they're talking about with aphrodisiacs generally, inspired this entire hour-long presentation and made me think about the way that I create things in a different way. And this visual of having a reservoir of knowledge in the back of my head that I can go tap into and draw water from at any time I want to. So that's one example. Also, Bird by Bird is highly inspiring to me. So I have a list of the different books that I really like. Some of my favorite drinks are that aren't necessarily related to sort of no code, low code development, and specifically like things that I, talk about from a technical standpoint. And I have this list. So this is where a second brain, for example, comes in handy, because you don't want to have this cognitive overload of trying to remember every single piece of your reservoir. You can have it stored somewhere for you. So in my case, I have one called The Bee's Needs, and I have like some of my favorite tech. I have some of my favorite playlists. I have some of my favorite books and book clubs. Here are some of my favorite books: The Big Leap, The Genius Zone, You Are Badass at Making Money, You're a Badass, We Should All Be Millionaires, The Fifth Agreement, The Four Agreements, High Performance Habits, Atomic Habits, Your Creative Brain, Bird by Bird, Ultimate Course Formula, How to Create and Sell Your Online Courses in 60 Days or Less, The 5-Second Rule, and so on. I have many more favorite books. This is just the start. But the idea here being that you can use your second brain to house all of this information about each of these different categories, but you can draw from this as your reservoir. You can call this even my reservoir if you want to, and have your key quotes and have anything else that you want stored here. So I highly recommend books being one of your main sources of water for your reservoir. The other one I would say is courses. So take courses. I listen to different courses every day as well. So in the morning, I do like a personal development 30 minutes, but which always turns into like an hour, where I either listen to an audiobook like this while I'm doing my hair and makeup, or I listen to a course if it's something that I can listen to rather than having to type. And then I try to see how I might implement that in a future Wednesday build episode, or in a build, or anything else in my life. Um, so different sources of courses that you might want to look into specifically are, I really like BBC Maestro. So this is something I actually only recently discovered, but I really like. So the one that I've started with and first got into BBC Maestro was because of the Lee Child one. I think I saw an ad for it on YouTube or something. And Lee Child is the author of the Jack Reacher series. And his approach to writing is so interesting because he's just very down to earth about it. And it's very easy to relate to. And he says that one of the only rules of his is that in order to be a writer, you first need to be a reader. And I think the same thing applies here. I feel like interesting builds come from interesting and rich inner lives because you're thinking about things in a really interesting way because you're drawing from so many sources that only you have that particular catalog of knowledge in your brain because not everyone would have read the particular order of what you've read um, or at the time in your life that you read that thing. So I highly recommend his course about so when you think about when you're drawing filling up your own reservoir of sources of things you can draw on from inspiration, be as wide and varied as possible. I love to learn from authors and creatives like artists, authors, comedians, filmmakers, musicians, poets, just drawing from these people. Because if you think about it, if you're trying to build something from scratch that might be interesting or useful to you or to other people, then you're a creator. You're building something that has never existed before, or you're hoping to transform the way that something that does already exist, how it functions in the world or how it solves a problem. So you're doing a very creative task. Another book I really like that's also on Audible is called, and I've mentioned this one before, but I'll show you it here. It's called Your Creative Brain by Dr. Shelley Carson. So, and this book is also quite good by Tiago Forte, which is Building a Second Brain. But this one in particular is one of my favorites because she talks about creativity from a sort of very scientific standpoint and how you can walk through the creates brain sets model, which I'll talk about in a future episode. It's quite a scientific read sometimes, so it's one that's taking me longer to get through, but I really like it and I understand the brilliance of what she's saying. It's just not as easy to listen to or read from a standpoint of talking a lot of sort of medical jargon and language, but I understand what she's trying to say, and I really, really love it and appreciate what she's revealing in this. But the idea here is just that we're filling our brains with all these really, really amazing sources of information. One source being books or ebooks or audiobooks, another being from courses from masters of their craft. Like I said, in particular, I prefer to not prefer, but I really like and draw a lot from people who are authors, specifically writers of both fiction and nonfiction, poets, because of the way that they see the world and interact with the world. And that's part of the reason why I really like the book Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, because she, as you can see here, it says some instructions on writing and life. And she kind of talks about writing as important for everyone, not because you would necessarily want to like get an agent and like sell something, but actually because it changes the way that you interact with and see the world, because you're constantly paying more attention to the world and how you fit within the world. So I really like that idea because it's so true that once you have this part of your brain turned on that you are a writer, then you interact with the world, and your feelings and yourself in a way that makes it to where you pay more attention, and you turn your experiences into an expression that can be interpreted or consumed by somebody else. So that's just to say, definitely learn from people who are authors and become a person who interacts with the world in a way that's like a writer. Um, Another one is comedians. So I absolutely love comedy. Obviously, everybody loves comedy and they have their own flavor and sense of humor. I love this course by Sir Billy Connolly because he talks a lot about this concept of observation, which we've covered in the Wednesday build before, and which I think is probably the most important concept that I want people to take away, is around the idea of, especially around like observation plus curiosity, because you can observe something but not be curious about it. And the curiosity and connection is the most essential part of a creative process, is to say, I see something, I perceive something, I'm observing something about it, I'm making a connection, and I'm curious about how that might relate to something in the future or some other thing that is seemingly disparate. But anyway, so there's going to be a whole section in the future, or a whole Wednesday build episode on specificity in comedy. And so that's around the idea of the left turn and the ampersand, which is this idea of also around like collaboration in comedy. So I have come up with an idea from being inspired by comedy. Some of my favorite comedians are people like Sebastian Maniscalco. I really love Richard Ayoade, who's hilarious, and he has this great show called Travel. Richard Ayoade, what's it called? Travel Man 48 Hours In, and he's so funny, and all of his guests are hilarious. And I also really like this comedian called Stephen Merchant, who is hilarious. And they go together to some place. Oh, where do they go? Dubrovnik. Anyway, they go together and it's super, super funny. And so anyway, I'm going to be doing a deep dive on that particular episode and analyzing it and showing you how you can see from the way that they interact with each other, some collaboration elements, but also how they pay attention to things. And so that goes back to observation in comedy that Sir Billy Connolly talks about. I also love learning from musicians. So in this particular one, we have Mark Ronson, who is a brilliant musician and producer. So he talks about his process for creating music, and I actually didn't end up using this particular point in my previous episode on the Wednesday build about synesthesia, analogy and simile in no code, low code development, but I was inspired by this particular course because he says in there, he uses language like when he talks about music, he talks about it in a very synesthetic way, because he says things like the colors of the song, the texture of the song, and colors and textures don't have anything to do with music or sound. So he's having this synesthetic moment in that particular conversation where he's saying that to him, he experiences, he's not saying I have synesthesia, he's just talking about it in a synesthetic way, which is one where you take something like sound and lyrics and music and songs and relating that to things like textures and colors, which I think is very interesting. So you can be inspired by such a wide range of things. In during Lawrence's one, she talks about grief and overcoming grief because her son was unfortunately murdered. And so she talks about sort of how you can regain your confidence and sort of overcome grief and loss. One I'm watching right now is Edgar Wright, who is the director and writer, along with some co-writers and stuff of different movies like Baby Driver, as well as Scott Pilgrim versus World, as well as Hot Fuzz, and is it Shaun of the Dead. So he does a lot of like dark comedy as well as action, as well as lots of different stuff. But I really like his course so far. And what you'll notice actually is I have ADD with courses, but it doesn't mean that I'm not paying attention. It's just that I don't necessarily have to finish one before I start another, because I think that there's so many things to learn, and there are so many different categories of things to learn, that I just want to bounce around them and learn from all these different sources and put all of them into my reservoir, into my head, to be able to draw from many, many different sources when I'm talking about something, when I'm thinking about a build, when I'm thinking about what I want to do. So I highly recommend these particular courses, specifically this one by Edgar Wright, specifically this one by Billy Connolly, and also by Lee Child and Mark Ronson, as well as Doreen Lawrence. Another source, because this is kind of like UK specific, not specific, obviously anyone can do this, but from the BBC. There's also another one called Masterclass, which I used to have a subscription to, and I'm thinking about getting one again. But I actually did watch a lot of these. There was one on gardening, which was very interesting. I did this one on writing. I dabbled in this one by Natalie Portman on acting. I haven't seen this one, but I would really like to. Gordon Ramsay's in here. So you can really learn from so many different masters. I think there's also one here, yeah, Bob Iger, and then we also have Sarah Blakely, which is great. And actually, these are great because they have, from a pricing standpoint, a pretty good deal. So I'm gonna see. Let me see if I can see view plans. They're usually like £100 a year, or sorry, less than $200 a year to access all of them. So this is like better than Netflix, because you can, I mean, I watch Netflix as well, and that's another category we'll go into, but from an educational standpoint, this is a really pretty good deal and value of like £22 a month, or for an individual, it's only £14 a month if you build annually. So it's quite good. And I think this one was also not that expensive as well, from a pricing standpoint, which was, I think, like £100 a year. So just invest in education and courses, because this is probably one of the most inspirational things I've ever experienced outside of individual books. So books and courses are excellent ways to fill up your reservoir, and don't be afraid. Please don't be afraid of bouncing around. I will watch the one from Lee Child on one day, Sir Billy Connolly the next day, Mark Ronson the next day, Edgar Wright the next day, Doreen Lawrence the next day, and then I'll pop into Audible and listen to Aphrodite, and then I'll listen to Building Your Second Brain, and then I'll listen to Use Your Method. And it's okay to bounce around, because there's so much to learn in the world, and it really like enriches your life in such a big way. Another great source of courses is Udemy. So Udemy is the one where I actually first got introduced to this idea of learning Document through a course, is by HJ Tech. This course is quite good as well. And I've also, it says 1% complete, but I think I've completed more than that, but that's fine. But the 100 Days of Code is a Python course by Angela Yu, who is fabulous. And she does the London app brewery. And also there's other Python courses that I'm going to be taking as well. Another great source of courses, specifically in the realm of like coding and tech, has to do with She Codes, which is a great source of knowledge. And specifically the basics one is good foundation from a foundation standpoint. And I think it's less than $100, maybe less than even $80. So it's really, really, really good. And I took that first, and it really influenced and you don't like have to learn how to code in order to use obviously like no code tools, but I personally think it helps you to understand what's happening, and that allows you to be more creative in the way that you build things because you understand what's going on in the background, even if you use the no code aspects of it. When you're using them, you know what's happening and how they're interacting with each other. I personally feel that way, but if you want to just focus on no code, that's fine too. I did have to delay my start date on this just a little bit because I was doing it at the same time as trying to get ready for the fellowship, as well as running this particular show and the digital magazine, and I just felt quite overloaded. So I'm putting this just down the line a tiny bit, but I do highly recommend all of these courses, which I've purchased all of them. Domestica is also a great source of different courses, and they are always tempting me with new courses on web design because all of these look so delicious and yummy, and I just want to consume all of these different people's knowledge of all these amazing courses. However, I have to also limit myself from a money standpoint as well, because I'm already investing in all these different ones. So I have invested though in the Introduction to Notion for Creative Projects from Frances O'Dara Matthews. So I haven't finished it just yet, but I have learned and been inspired so much by this course. And Frances's course is just awesome and fabulous. The community is quite good as well. And her Notion flips are so cool. I highly recommend checking out her templates and things. So that's also a great source of inspiration to fill up your reservoir as well. And I've been inspired by her to create my own stuff from a different builds perspective as well. I'm trying to remember. I had this idea around sort of like, oh, I had the idea for the digital magazine for Code Word Hex, kind of from, she has something called the Notion Zine, which I've mentioned before. And that's the idea that she used. She used Notion to create this thing called the Notion Zine, which are templates that in Notion that look like magazines. So you can see here, they look like a paper magazine format, but it's actually created in Notion, which I think is just really, really clever. So I created something that's not exactly like this, but it just inspired me to create something like a digital magazine in Notion, or sorry, in using Gavel, formerly Document. So this is Code Word Hex, and the idea is that you get kicked out of this if you don't answer the question correctly. But if you answer the question correctly, then you're taken to the option to look at different issues of the magazine, particular ones, and then you can continue and view this, as well as get access to the links and whatever else I'm talking about here, and then you're done. So that was inspired by this course as well. So allow these things to influence you. Put them in your reservoir and draw from them whenever you are trying to build something or thinking about something, and relax your mind in a way that will allow you to make different connections between different concepts and different tools and different solutions and product ideas. The other one is my own academy. And so I have an academy called Cormam Academy, where I have different course offerings on things like Gavel, which is formerly Document, as well as Software and Airtable and different certification courses. So I absolutely love being a teacher. Hopefully I'm doing a good job and I'm inspiring some people, but basically, I go over things like Software, Airtable, Notion, Zapier, as well as Gavel or Document formerly. And I just think it's so good to just expand and try all of these different options. Next, we will talk about movies. So if you think about like Netflix, for example, or Disney Plus or anything else, the concept around movies is really less about specific movies and more about stories. So we talked in the last episode about the story brand script, which relates to, let me see if I can find the image here, which relates to this idea of the fact that most or all stories, plots can be broken down into this framework of I think it's 7 steps. So this 7 plot structure is basically that a character with a problem meets a guide who gives them a plan and calls them to action that results in success or failure. And when we think about this framework and just stories generally, we can be inspired by the content of film. We can be inspired by the filmmaking process, specifically around things like screenwriting, but we can also be inspired by just the structure of story generally. And the author of this book, Donald Miller, the book is The Story Brand Script, something like how to clarify your messages so people can understand, something like that. And anyway, so he talks about using this from a marketing perspective and a business perspective. And it has really honestly changed how I think about marketing, but also about building, because his number one thing that I think is so important generally too, when you think about building new solutions for people, either like not for yourself, but in the case of building for someone else or a particular audience, is that you are not the hero, you're the guide. Heroes aren't looking for other heroes to fill their stories. They're looking for a guide, and you are the guide in that story. So we can be really, really inspired by this concept and really have it drive our innovation and drive how we create different products in our businesses. The next one is going to be things like learning centers. So it sounds so weird, but I would recommend that let's go to Gavel's example. So if you go to, let's say, gavel.io, for example, and you go to their learning center, and this is so fun because they just rebranded as Gavel like yesterday. So the idea that I'm going to be talking about here relates to the idea of when you're thinking of content or how to use something or create something interesting or different. One thing you could do, which is something that I will be doing as well, is going to the help centers of the tools that I use and just starting from the top and just reading their help center articles from top to bottom and getting inspiration from what you find. So for example, if we go to the Gavel Learning Center, and we could say get started or start from any of these parts, but let's go to lesson topics, for example, and we could go to the demo video. Maybe just watching this video gives me some idea of either something that I could make or how to use some tool, part of the tool differently than I normally do. Specifically, maybe we go into this one, crash course, live demos, setting up questions, setting up documents. Maybe I'll learn something new. What can you build? Maybe this will give me some ideas and inspiration. User management. Some of these are new. Some of these user types are fairly recent and new. So I could try out what the different views of each person would look like, which type of user, and what their experience would be like. And actually, this is mine, I think. Oh, wait, that's pretty cool. This is fun. Yeah. Or maybe not. I can't remember. But anyway, so oh, maybe not. They just have the same color outline as me. That's cool. Well, either way, so you can, because one of my videos is in here somewhere. I'm trying to remember which one it was for. I think it's for, let's see if we can find it. Like custom CSS, I think. Let's see if they put it up. Well, I'll take a little quick pause to see if I'm famous in here. Let's say custom CSS. If not, it's fine. I'm not offended. No, not yet. That's okay. But either way, so I did a whole session where I did a live of how you can add custom CSS to your builds. Especially using Bootstrap themes, or sorry, it's called Bootswatch. And so I kind of went over how to use these. But anyway, I'm not offended, it's fine. So anyway, the idea here is that you could literally just go through, let's go back to the Gavel Learning Center. Look at a tool that you're using. Let's say it's Gabble, it could be Notion. Let's go like Help Center and just try something like guides and just say like the best ways to use simple tables in your Notion pages and what and when not to. Maybe you'll learn something new. They actually changed a couple things recently with tables that I recently saw, which is pretty cool. Look at their feature updates is another great one. So also like look at people's wish lists. Like you could come up with solutions for people's wish lists. Like, you know, if a solution is not on a product roadmap that you want for a long time, maybe that's a solution you could build sort of a way around and monetize that. Or thinking about, like I said, just different ways that you can fill up your particular reservoir and come up with your own favorite different drinks. In particular, mine is things like help centers, books, courses, movies, when you break everything down, the structure of how things are made and used. So let's say, for example, if we were going to come in here, maybe if I was looking at, I actually personally don't use the PDFs a lot. So there's a lot I can learn from this. Not that I don't know how to do it. It's just that I just prefer to use the Word add-in and like operate and use Word a lot more than PDFs. I just feel like there's so many things, and Word itself is so powerful. It's insane, like what you can do. Like this is even another source of inspiration and another thing you can put into your reservoir, which is like each of these particular buttons. So you could have content or ideas forever, just like starting from left to right and top to bottom, looking at something closely. For example, like if you just went to like all of the different things that you could do under file, or all the things you could do under edit, or all the things you can do over here, or tools, or whatever else. Like I've never even tried Researcher. I could do like a whole video on Researcher, or maybe come up with some really cool thing on whatever Researcher is. I don't know. Or going over to let's just say references, and just going from button to button to button to button to button to button to button and just trying new things is a really great source of inspiration. But it means that you need to build in time for experimentation into your calendar and also for failure. So building in time for failure is one of the things that I think is a really important concept. And the time for experimentation, which is hard to do because we're still busy all the time. But I think that you should give yourself time and space to experiment and fail, and to think and to rest. But that's a story for another day. So I would recommend also, if you go to Zapier, you can see, and some people pronounce it as Zapier. I get that from a spelling perspective, that if it was like Zapier, maybe it'd have two P's. So Zapier is more like correct possibly, but if you think about it, they call them Zaps. So I think it makes more sense to call them Zapier, but that's fine. That's fine. I'm going to call it Zapier. You call it whatever you like. So the point here is, if we go to explore, you can say find ways for Zapier to handle repetitive tasks in the apps you use every day. Zapier automates 5,000 plus apps in millions of ways. Let's find a way to save you some time. So just like try one. Seamlessly transfer all of your data from one app to another. Find pre-made workflows to help you save time and resources. Build something myself by connecting all my apps together. Start in minutes, save hours. So look at how many apps there are here. You could literally just start from the top and just pick one and see like all the millions of things you could do with Google Sheets using Zapier, and all the millions of things you could do with Gmail. And then think about the fact that you could have like endless combinations using Zapier. So it'd be like MailChimp to Google Sheets, or Twitter to Google Drive, or HubSpot to Facebook, or Trello to Discord, or email, I don't know, to Notion, or Airtable to Google Forms. And just like pick one and start somewhere and just try one. Here are some use cases to just get you started. collect new typeform responses as rows on Google Sheets, send emails in Gmail for new leads and Facebook lead ads. So just thinking of even just practicing one of these and just getting the mechanics of um, how you might do something could inspire a new solution that you could create. So the reservoir here is a database of all of the many, many, many thousands of millions of different tasks that you could delegate to Zapier. And because Zapier integrates with things, or you can use it for all these different tools, including things like Gavel, Notion, and more, then you can come up with an endless supply of things that you could create. So sometimes when we think about this notion of writer's block, it's understandable that we can feel, and I do too sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, oh, what am I going to say? I have no idea what I'm going to say. I just remember that like I've lived a life for 33 years and I can draw from my like we talked about the user method again. I can draw from my personal experiences. I can like learn from a new course. I can read books that where one line will inspire an hour-long conversation and will give me content for a week. And maybe there's other lines in that book that also inspire me, or a line from that book connects to another book that I've read that inspires something else, or it reminds me of a movie that I saw, or whatever else. So when we constantly fill up our reservoirs with many, many different sources of information, especially if they're wide, like from a wide range and varied sort of categories, like I was saying. So things like comedy and as well as like productivity, and then like mixing those things together. As I mentioned, you will have more of an interesting build if you have an interesting life, which you can cultivate. So you can cultivate a rich and interesting inner life that creates and produces interesting builds, apps, workflows, and whatever you want to call it. Because you've drawn from a vast array of different sources to make your builds more interesting and to just solve people's problems in interesting and different ways. We've also talked about learning and help centers, as well as just going to the help center and just going article by article and really, really delving deep into your particular platforms that you use in your tech stack and thinking about how you might be able to solve certain problems either in your own life or in your customers' lives, your end users' lives, by just understanding well what and becoming a deep expert in what you're using and what tools are available to you. So that is kind of the main portion of today's topic. So if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll give you my contact information afterwards. I'm always happy to answer any questions and talk about what we've talked about today. For a few announcements, so I run this Wednesday build every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Feel free to join me. And thank you for those of you that are with me. And I also produce a new issue of Code Word Hex, where I'll focus on a build that I've made or a new build I'm thinking about or working on, and just go into depth on how you could also create something like that or be inspired by that. I have courses, as you saw, on software Airtable and more, as well as certification courses in Gavel, formerly Documate. I'm currently the program director and senior instructor for a fellowship program called the Law Students in Legal Tech Access to Justice Fellowship, where we just started and kicked off week 3 out of 12, and then there's going to be a hackathon at the end. There is rolling admission, so if you're interested in joining us, if you're a current law student, an incubatee of a legal program, or a recent graduate within 1 year of your graduation date, you can apply by going to our, just go to gavel.io and it's under announcements. Also, you can join the Chromium community by joining any of my courses. And then also there's a very active Slack group for Gavel. So thank you so much for your time today. Our next session will be next Wednesday, the 8th of February at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Our topic will be the calm imperative plus sonic mood manipulation and cultivation. And this is the connection between physiology and high performance. So I will go into depth on how the fight or flight response can be really negative on how you are able to build and perform well and have excellence in your builds, and how you can manipulate that and calm yourself with meditation and different types of techniques with sound. And then if you'd like to connect with me, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you'd like to send me an email, you can email me at brittany@permian.pro. And then also, if you want to reach out to me, I also do live workshops for different law schools. And today I'm actually going to be talking to Stetson in about an hour. So you can reach out to me at brittany@gavel.io with any inquiries relating to that particular one as well. So it was so nice to have you here, and I'm so excited to get to talk to you about this today. It was super fun for me to kind of prepare this, and I will see you in next week's episode. Bye, everyone.